So before we start this video, I just want to give a quick shout out to the notification squad, the people who are here and clicked on this video because they got notified on their phone or an email. You guys are awesome. Thank you. And if you're not part of the notification squad, please join. What are you waiting for? So in this video, I'm going to list the 7 Yu-Gi-Oh! Summoning types, summoning mechanics, whatever you want to call them, from best to worst, in my opinion. This excludes normal summons and flip summons. I thought that those were just so bread and butter that it wasn't really worth talking about. But this does include tribute summons and even the new link summons, so should be a lot of fun. So the criteria I use to decide this list are basically how difficult the summoning mechanic is to do. That is, like, you know, how many cards do you have to invest in it, what do you have to have, and all of that. How worthwhile the monsters are, you know, like, is it worth it to summon this type of monster? Does it pay for itself in general? And just how many different decks can use each summoning mechanic right now. So yeah, of course, these are just my personal opinions. As always, feel free to disagree. Let me know in the comments, in fact, what are your favorite summoning mechanics, least favorite summoning mechanics, why not? Let's talk about it. So kicking off with number 7, we've got Link Monsters. Unfortunately, I didn't want to start this video off negatively, and I didn't want this to become, like, you know, an anti-Link thing. I don't want to derail, but the reason why I put Link Monsters at 7th is because I feel like right now they simply are not worth it. For a lot of different reasons. I feel like, you know, the design's not really great right now. It sucks that, you know, they open up the extra monster zones and that people are forced to use them for that reason, but that's not even really why I don't like them. Well, it's part of it, but it's also just kind of the fact that the arrows, for example, they usually aren't able to make full use of their arrows. Like, no matter where you put most Link monsters, they aren't ever actually able to, like, get the full use. So let's take, say, Firewall Dragon, for example, that points, you know, up, down, left, right, but there's no place on the, you know, monster card zone where you can actually get all those arrow effects. In addition, they cost a lot of monsters to summon. Like, you know, for decks that are forced to use something like Decode Talker, that's 3 monsters. Like, is it worth summoning 3 monsters to get this thing out, which is just sort of a mediocre boss monster? I mean, you know, Mrs. Radiant's one of the more generic ones, but Mrs. Radiant also can't really protect itself, doesn't have great attack, and then it requires you to run Link Spider in your extra deck, which for most decks doesn't even actually do anything, and it's just kind of at that point where Link monsters, they feel like just a necessary evil. Like, you're almost sort of forced to use them, but it's not actually fun and no one really enjoys it. Now, I'm gonna be fair, I think the Link monsters have loads of room to grow. I'm probably just being impatient. We'll see what becomes of Link monsters in the next year or two. You know, they'll probably get a lot faster, a lot better support, but as it is now, I just don't think that they're worth the, you know, the time and effort that it takes to summon them. So unfortunately, they get number 7. Number 6 is Pendulum Monsters. So, Pendulum Monsters maybe a few months ago would have been a little bit higher up on my list, but as it is right now, I feel like Pendulums just simply cannot function as a summoning type. And they made 6th on this list not just for that reason, but also because they're, well, first of all, Pendulums, most decks can't actually use Pendulum summoning. It's pretty strange to think about, but Pendulums as a whole were more or less a walled garden. Konami released very specific Pendulum support, very specific Pendulum archetypes that could use it, and the average layman's deck just couldn't really, like, make use of Pendulums if they just kind of wanted to have some fun. Unlike maybe things like Synchros or Xyz, you pretty much have to have a Pendulum deck if you want to do Pendulum summoning, and I feel like that's a real downside. In addition to that, you know, most of the major Pendulum archetypes right now, there are the ones from the past, are currently just not great. You know, Pepe's dead, Metal Foes are dead, Pendulum Magicians kind of make a splash, and that's kind of just where it ends. I mean, like, you know, Cleaforts have lost a lot of their power cards and stuff, and Perform Pals in general are just a bit crept, so it really sucks, but that's sort of the state of Pendulums right now. And then compound that with the fact that the new extra deck mechanics severely cripple this summoning type. It's really hard to really abuse the whole monsters going to the extra deck, because if you can't summon more than maybe 1 or 2 at a time because you don't have the proper Link monsters in the field, bleh. Oh, and then last but not least, we can't forget the fact that Spell and Trap removal completely destroys this mechanic. Twin Twisters actually crept the mechanic out in and of itself, and now we have Heavy Storm Duster, Unending Nightmare, and then the card that actually breaks the mechanic, Anti-Spell Fragrance. It's just like, it's a really hostile territory for Pendulums right now, so unfortunately, number 6. Number 5 is Ritual Monsters, and it's actually really unfortunate because I quite like Ritual Monsters concept. I think it's really cool that you're gonna have to have this card that's the sacrifice or the ritual or the ceremony, and then you have to, like, you know, pay monsters, and then you summon out a big boss that's supposed to be really strong. But unfortunately with Ritual Monsters, they have the really obvious flaw of you have to have the Ritual Spell in your hand and you have to have the Ritual Monster in your hand. If you have either one without the other, it tends to be dead. There are archetypes that have circumvented some of this. You know, Necrons are generally hand trap type monsters that have their own effects. Cyber Angels pay for themselves when they are attributed, but still it doesn't change the fact that in general Ritual Monsters just have a lot of struggles with like maintaining the card advantage, because when you have both of these situational cards in your hand, you still have to lose a lot from your hand or field to summon the monsters out, and for the most part, they're not worth it. In recent years, Konami's done a good job of sort of changing this, not only with the archetypes themselves, but with cards like Preparation of Rites, Pre-Preparation of Rites. It's just that right now, like, Rituals, they're just in this weird place. I think that they've got some more potential because they don't have to use the extra deck, and they don't have to worry about the whole Link Monsters, extra monster zones. But at the same time, not Link Monsters, but Ritual Monsters probably would have done better in the extra deck, so that way you only have to have the spell. I think that would have made them extremely competitive. But if you do like Ritual Monsters, you can actually check out my video from the other day where I gave the top 10, in my opinion, Ritual Monsters right now. Check it out, I'll have a link. Number 4 is Tribute Summoning. So this is actually interesting that it made it this high up, because a lot of people like to think that, you know, Tribute Summoning is just a bad mechanic, you know, you lose too many cards, it's not worth it. But when I look at Tribute Summoning, it doesn't happen very much. It's not like all too common in the game, but most of the Tribute Summonable monsters that are used are actually really, really powerful. I think of cards like Vanity's Fiend and Majesty's Fiend. I think of, you know, Spell Canceller and Jinzo, Fog King, for example. A lot of these like sort of floodgate style high level monsters that you Tribute Summon out are actually pretty good monsters. And, you know, in addition to that, there's the fact that, you know, you've got like True Draco as an archetype right now, which I don't even know if you'd really count that as Tribute Summoning, but sure, why not? But just, yeah, in general, I think the Tribute monsters, they're not super popular, but they are really good in the side deck. And when they do come out, they actually tend to be a problem. Like I said, when a Majesty's Fiend hits the field, it's usually kind of curtains for some decks, and the same goes for, you know, it's those things that say banish everything while it's in the field, or, you know, whatever. But yeah, in general, I think that Tribute Summons aren't actually as bad as people say. They're just more rare than the other summoning types. So I guess in a sense maybe it doesn't deserve the spot because it's not super common for every deck to use, but they are popular as side deck cards, and when they do come out, they do make quite an impact on the game. So number 4. Number 3 for me is Fusion Monsters. And it's kind of weird because Fusion Monsters aren't technically much better than Ritual Monsters. In fact, in some ways they're worse because, you know, with Fusion Monsters you have to have these specific monsters and you still have to have a spell. But honestly, in recent years, a lot of that's gone completely out the window. You've got super powerful fusion archetypes like Shaddolls that just reign supreme for a long time. And then, you know, things like Ritual Beasts and Gladiator Beasts and like Cyber Dragons that sort of just started doing the whole contact fusing thing where you don't have to have the spell. And I guess if you want to count it, you've got Instant Fusion and Brilliant Fusion that bring out like Seraphonite and, while I was around, Norden, and, you know, like Sea Monster Theseus. These cards that, I guess it's not fusing, but, you know, they are good fusion monsters and they do make a splash in the game. I actually truly think that like fusion monsters are probably the most balanced of everything on the list, and I think that's kind of fun. It's like they don't feel overpowered like the next two things that you can probably guess, but they also don't feel too situational. Konami's done a better job, I think, than Rituals of making fusions pretty easy to use, easy to search. There's plenty of ways to get polys. A lot of archetypes get their own sort of fusion type of card like Invocation. And so, all in all, I think it just deserves number 3 on the list. Now, number 2 and number 1 are pretty arguable, and a lot of it just comes down to personal preference. But for me, number 2 is Synchro Summoning. So, Synchro Summoning is like kind of what a lot of these older summoning types should have been. What's cool about Synchro Summoning is that you don't have to have a spell to do it, you just have to have a tuner. So instead of like having maybe 2 monsters and a spell, you just have 2 monsters and one just has to be the type of monster that you need, tuner. It's neat that you have to add up the levels. I like that that sort of stops it from just being completely abusable and spammy. But yeah, you know, Synchro Monsters made a big splash in the game. They kind of signaled the change from like slower paced strategies to just strategies where you just sort of like summon more and more cards. You can like synchro summon off with Synchro Monsters. So like, you know, maybe you would sync into this thing and it would do something, and then you'd use a Glow Up Bulb and bring it back from the grave and sync again. And speaking of Glow Up Bulb, that's actually what I think Konami did right with tuners, was eventually they got to the point where, you know, with Glow Up Bulb, Plague Spreader Zombie, you know, like Unknown Synchron, they were really easy to get out quickly. They were really easy to reuse. Some of the strongest like, Synchro monsters in the game, like, you know, you've got like Trishula, you've got Ignister Prominence, Brionic, all these cards that made a huge splash and a really big impact. So I think that Synchro Monsters, they're accessible. You know, many decks can use them. Even if your deck's not good at Synchro summoning, you can always throw in like a Glow Up Bulb or just maybe some generic tuner. I mean, most decks have like Ash Blossom and Ghost Ogre now, so like that's a cool thing. And just honestly and truly, it's something that any deck can do as an out, and that's what I like about it. And number one, in my opinion at least, is Xyz Monsters. So, like I said, it's kind of a toss-up between which you prefer more, but I think that Xyz edge synchros out a little bit, mainly because Xyz monsters are so easy for just almost any deck to use. It's just two monsters of the same level, or, you know, sometimes three or whatever, but you get the picture, right? Like, level 4, you've got the rank 4 toolbox, and so many decks have level 4 monsters, it's just easy to get to out on the field. And then you have access to all of these things like Abyss Dweller and Castel and Silent Honor Arc and Daigusto Emerald and just, you know, these different like rank 4 toolbox monsters that are easy ways to out things, easy ways to shut decks down. And, you know, for a long time, like rank 3 was also really prominent. You had like Levier and you had, what was it, Zenmain, stuff like that, Dante, of course. I think that also with Xyz monsters, it was cool because you had the rank up thing, which most decks didn't really use, but it was always fun when you could pull it off. And Xyz monsters' effects just ended up being some of the more powerful ones in the game. When I think of the more broken formats recently, it tended to revolve around some Xyz monster. I mean, you know, Dragon Rulers with like Big Eye and Draco Sack, or powerful cards like Exiton Knight and Shockmaster, just those kinds of things. Cyber Dragon Infinity, totally awesome. I think that like Xyz just edge synchros out in terms of more decks being able to use them and their effects being a little bit more applicable in common games, common matches. So yeah. So that's the video. Those are, in my opinion, the 7 Yu-Gi-Oh! Summoning types from best to worst. Obviously this is going to be different for everybody. Like I said at the beginning of the video, they're just my opinions. Feel free to disagree. Let me know in the comments what summoning mechanics you like and don't like. Make a list, best to worst, why not. Let's hear about it. So yeah, hope you guys liked the video. Give it a thumbs up if you did, and like I said at the beginning, be sure to subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! And hit the notification button so you don't miss a single vid. Check out my sponsor, TCG Player. Follow me on social media. I think that's gonna be it. So I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later.